from Austria.
Yes.
Coming to here to present a seminar. And the title is quite interesting. It is on neoliberalism and the consequence for social work. So, however, even with this background, Professor Stark is not purely an academic. He worked a long time in frontline. So he was a social worker for homeless people in Europe for a long time before he became a professor. Feel free after the presentation, ask Professor Stark anything related to the presentation, as well as anything that you may feel comfortable related to his clinical work in Austria as well as in Europe, and then maybe comparing the differences between the two. So without any delay, I pass the microphone, not the microphone, the podium for Professor Stark.
Thank you very much, dear colleague, for the warm welcome. I'd like to welcome you for this seminar. My name is Christian Stark, and it's a great pleasure for me to be here and give this lecture. I'm here in Hong Kong for 4 days. We have a big fair for universities from all over Europe here tomorrow, and I get to know, first time I get to know Hong Kong students last May. There was Dr. Zhang with about 6 students from you in Rovaniemi in Finland, and we get into contact, and so it's possible to be here now and give you the lecture. Yes, the topic I present today is, I call it the ideology of neoliberalism and the consequences for social work as we feel it, especially in Austria, but I think all over Europe. I don't know, but we can compare how the situation in Hong Kong is. First, I want to give a brief overview about the development and history. The term neoliberalism was coined a long time ago, in the past century, in 1938, by economists Friedrich von Hayek, Röpke and Eucken and others, and it was an economic policy concept and the counter concept to Keynesianism. In the early 20s, in 1929, there was a big crisis, like years ago, the Black Friday we call it, and after this crisis, there was a rethinking in economy, perhaps John Maynard Keynes, who said that also the state has to regulate the market. But neoliberal economists form a counter concept. They want absolutely free market, and German politics science defines neoliberalism as a capitalism which is liberated from all democratic and social inhibitions and scruples. The establishment of the neoliberal project started with the foundation of the so-called Mont Pelerin Society. Mont Pelerin is a mountain near the Lac Léman, Geneva in Switzerland, a very wonderful area. And it started with the establishment of an international network of foundations, institutes, research centers and journals to spread neoliberal thinking. The scientific breakthrough succeeded with a series of awards of the Nobel Prize for Economics Sciences. The first was in 1969 for Hayek, and then for, perhaps Milton Friedman from the Chicago School of Economics in 1976. The political implementation of this economic thinking first started in Southern America, in Chile. It was the first experimental field. There was a revolution, a putsch in 1973. There was a socialist government by Salvador Allende, and The US didn't like this government. There was something like a putsch, and with the support of the military regime of Augusto Pinochet, the Chile economy was restructured in neoliberal sense. So it wasn't free, it was no free market, the market was supported by the state. Then neoliberal thinking was spread from the periphery to the center during the years where Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister of the UK and Ronald Reagan was President of the US. They spread and they pushed neoliberal thinking so that people were speaking about Reaganomics and Thatcherism. And with the dismantling of the Iron Curtain, the end of the Cold War, I'll hope it won't start again when we see what happened in the Ukraine. Yes, in 1989, with the end of the communism period in the Soviet Union, the neoliberalism became the predominant economic doctrine. As Margaret Thatcher told, now there is no alternative to capitalism. And people called it the Tina syndrome. There is no alternative. Because Miss Thatcher forgot that capitalism exists for 300 years and mankind exists for millions of years. It is a very short thinking. So now I want to make a little bit a comparison that neoliberal thinking and this economic concept has elements of a new world religion. You know, religions have one god or more gods. Yes, it depends on the religion. I don't know what's the predominant religion here. Taoism, Buddhism. I also saw Christian churches here. Yes, they come. Religions have one god. What's the god of neoliberalism and capitalism? It's profit. Perhaps you know this guy. And in religions you make sacrifices to your gods. What's the sacrifice to this god? Yes, you have to save. You have to tighten one's belt. Yes. Often there are human sacrifices. The minority of rich often lives at the expense of the majority, the middle class and the poor. There are also human sacrifices. Job cuts, and when jobs are cut, the stock prices raise. There are also divine laws. Adam Smith coined this law, you know, the law of the invisible hand of the market. Who has ever seen this invisible hand? Adam Smith told that if we free the Marxists, that will be rich and wealth for the whole world. But when we look at the world, of course, there are parts of wealth and richness, and there are parts of very, very poor people. And in every big cities, in Southern America, also in Europe, we have the slums. Capitalism, neoliberalism produces wealth and richdom for some people, but it also produces poverty. And also in this neoliberal economic thinking, faith masquerades as knowledge. Under the cloak of science, faith poses as knowledge, combined with a universal claim for salvation. I told you this phrase, there is no alternative to capitalist neoliberal thinking. It reminds me of an old Roman Catholic phrase, extra ecclesia nulla salus, in Latin, beyond the Catholic Church there is no salvation. Perhaps you know this guy. He coined the phrase, who is not with me is against me. That's a phrase of the Gospel. The Gospel, the Holy Bible, the Gospel of Matthew, when he thought every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. Thanks God he isn't president. Then there are also the saints, the former economists like Adam Smith coined the phrase of the invisible hand, John Locke or David Ricardo. I studied theology in former days, therefore I make this comparison. The head theologians, Friedrich von Hayek or Milton Friedman. There are also bishops and high priests, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, the president of the World Bank, the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, or the director of the WTO, the World Trade Organization. There are also the henchmen. If top managers swing the profit club, employees must fear for their jobs. Then you know in the Catholic Church perhaps there's the Vatican, yes, with a center, the Pope, yes, and also perhaps in this religion there's some Vatican who tells what's the truth, who has the power, the World Bank or the WTO or the International Monetary Fund, when he gives his special programs. And there's also a holy war. The Roman Catholic Church makes crusades in the Middle Ages. It was called the Holy War. And now perhaps you know this was in the name of God, in the name of democracy, of the human rights. And the photos beyond show you how holy this was, perhaps in the Iraq, in the Iran, when the US came, how holy these wars were. There's also Satan. Who was the Satan? Long times in former days. This was the Satan for capitalism. Then this guy, then this guy, and this guy. Yes. You always need an enemy. Yes. In former days it was the communists, and now especially the Muslim. And the heretics, yes, who don't believe in this religion, who criticize this economic concept, perhaps Noam Chomsky, or who did other ways of economy, like Hugo Chavez or Lula in Brazil and Venezuela, who didn't allow the big concerns to earn all the money and who don't allow to privatize everything. Also the so-called anti-globalization movement, especially in the so-called third world, where there's so much poverty and only big concerns make profit of the big treasures every country has. Maybe oil, maybe diamonds in Congo and so on. And there are also, in many religions, myths and dogmas who can't be proved in empiric science. One is we can't afford the welfare state any longer. In Europe, in Austria, we have a long tradition of the social welfare state, more than 100 years. It started at the end of the 19th century, or the phrase, the fat years are over, performance must be worthwhile, less state, more private. If the economy is doing well, everybody is doing well. Let's look more in detail at these myths and dogmas. We can't afford the welfare state any longer. If you speak the truth, you have to say, politicians have to say, we don't want to afford the welfare state any longer. What we can afford depends on what politicians want to afford. There's always enough money, but it's a matter of distribution of the money. Also in the crisis, there are many guys who make profit with the crisis. On the one hand, there are debts, but money is never destroyed, yes? Money also changes, yes, from person to person. There is enough money, as I said, but it isn't distributed it's distributed unequally. And like Mahatma Gandhi says once, there is enough for everybody's needs, but not enough for the greed of some people. The fat years are gone, yet it depends for whom the fat years are gone. Yes, there are some persons for those the fat years exists, and the other one, like the small mice, for them the fat years are gone. Or performance must be worthwhile. Some people always tell the story that the very, very rich people, they have done good performances, yes? But if you compare perhaps the loan, how many wages, yes, how high the gap of the wage between normal employees and the managers are, sometimes 1 to 250 or 1 to 550. You can ask you the question, can a person really do 500 times more than someone else? Perhaps one example, the new Yahoo manager Marissa Mayer gains 37 billion US for a half year's work. That means 7,000 euro. That's about 70,000 Hong Kong dollar in an hour. Yes, and that's crazy. Yes, that's crazy. Yes, and they always speak of the big responsibility. But what happened after the crisis and the wrong managers, the bankers, they gone many money. Also, they have ruined some banks. The responsibility has been carried out by the people. There's also some hypocrisy when economists speak about the free market. It's not always free, yes? And on the one hand, they force perhaps the poor countries to open their markets. Also, in the 19th, China was forced, yes? The Opium War, yes? They were forced to open. Also, Japan was forced to open the market. It was not free, they were forced to open it. And on the one hand, they were forced to open the markets, the third world countries, and at the same time, the US, also the EU, give subsidies and product duties to their own. African states are forced to free the trade due to the pressure of the International Monetary Fund, and perhaps farmers in the EU and US got more than $300 billion subsidies. Or also when you watch this so-called invisible hand, it only works with the hidden fist. Like a journalist close to the US ministry told, the invisible hand of the market cannot work without the hidden fist. McDonald's cannot prosper without McDonnell Douglas. The invisible fist, which creates security over the world for the prospering of the technology of Silicon Valley, is called US Army, Air Force and Marine Corps. Less state, more private is another phrase, yes. But what happened when there was the big economic crisis, the financial crisis, yes? Was there the free market anymore? Who has to save the banks, yes? It was the taxpayer, the state, and the bankers were crying for the state. No more private. When the crisis was, also we have now a big bank troubles in Austria, now the state and the normal taxpayer has to save the banks. You play, the so-called casino capitalism, and we pay. They make the profit, we have the risk. What are the central core elements of neoliberal thinking? Of course, the market thinking, of course, has advantages, yes? And a market economy is not bad. But the problem is that in neoliberal thinking, the market serves as an universal model for the whole society. Market economy develops into market society. And all areas of life are subjected to the logic of the market, the logic of economic optimization. The human being, a person, with a heart and soul becomes human capital, only a cost factor. It dehumanizes persons. Also, privatization. Of course, privatization has its advantages, and it's normal to run a private organization, a restaurant, a concern, and so on. But the problem of privatization is if you privatize the so-called public goods like water, health, and traffic, that what belongs to everybody and should be afforded by everybody suddenly becomes the property of a few. There was an example perhaps in Bolivia when they privatize the water, yes, and people can't afford the water anymore. The prices rise 10 times, yes, and they make a revolution and throw them out. Privatization doesn't mean no renouncement of state interventions, but the state has to serve as an instrument of private economic interests. He should guarantee the necessary conditions for a free market, should be the focus on the support of the economic competitiveness and profitable capital utilization. And as an instrument of repression, the state is rearmed instead of disarmed. Also, another element is deregulation. Deregulation means the reduction of laws and rules. And in Austria we had a very strong, and all over Europe, social state. The laws and rules to protect the employee and the environment. When we in Austria and also in Europe hear about China, and here economists speaking, they admire China because it's a real economic miracle, yes? Big, yes, big wins. But on the other hand, we also hear about the air in China, yes? And that's also the risk. What are the side effects of this growing and growing? And of course in Austria we have stronger rules protecting the environment, yes, but in neoliberal thinking that's an obstacle for making profit. They are regarded as obstacles for investment and the restriction of the freedom of entrepreneurs. What means freedom? Freedom to destroy the environment. Freedom for entrepreneurs means it freedom to exploit workers. Like someone said, the freedom of wolves to poach in a free chicken coop among free chickens. Now what is neoliberalism thinking to social policy? One of these famous slogans is every man is the architect of his own fortune. But if every man and woman should be the architect of his own fortune, yes, he needs resources and he needs education. And not everybody has the same chance. A children in Somalia who is born to die for hunger has not the same chances as the son and the daughter of a rich man in the US. In neoliberal thinking, poverty is seen as a crisis of one's own making, a just penalty for non-performance. Unemployment is reinterpreted as a problem of individuals and their weakness, the weakness of character and lack of willingness to perform. The worker seems to be unable to sell himself or his work successfully on the market. We have a welfare market and a welfare state. Only on the welfare market, the so-called only citizens who can afford it buy social security. In Austria we have a health insurance for everybody. When you look at the US, it's much more difficult and you need to be very rich to have good health insurance. The welfare state means only minimum benefits which save people from staying or freezing to death, And apart from that, needs are entrusted to private charity. The state and the enterprises have no social responsibility in this thinking. Mass unemployment, starvation are accepted as side effects of the free market. Claims for social justice should seem to restrict the right to unlimited private property. Like Milton Friedman says, the only social responsibility of entrepreneurs is the responsibility for the profit of the shareholders. How did this neoliberal thinking establish? Noam Chomsky called it the fabrication of consent. He learned from Karl Marx, who said the ruling morals are the morals of the rulers, the ruling ideas are the ideas of the rulers. Or like George Orwell says in his novel 1984, and when all others believed the lies which were spread by the party, when all records told the same tale, then the lie went down in history and became the truth. Neoliberal thinking is, like someone said, poisoning our thoughts. Like catchphrases, I don't know if these catchphrases exist in China, but they are used very often in Austria. The catchphrases like the abusers of the welfare state, social scroungers, the social hammock, they divert the suspicion from the real culprits. The victims, the poor people, became offenders. The unemployed, the homeless, and the welfare recipients are accused to be responsible for empty public purses, not the tax evading multinational concerns, the multi-billionaires or the oligarchs, like we now see what happened, yes, in Ukraine, when many oligarchs exploited their country and give the money to Switzerland, to Austria, not paying taxes like to normal employee. Like Noam Chomsky says, capitalism means the private appropriation of profit, but the socialization of cost and risk. Some politicians and managers in our Western country talk about tightening our belts. We live beyond our means, while they are lining in their own pockets. Labor law and social rights are regarded as preservation of ownership, not the private property of multi-billionaires. There is a reduction of employee rights and social rights, and they are regarded as debureaucratization. On the other hand, there's an increase of bureaucracy if we regard disciplinary measures for unemployed and welfare recipients and regard the administration of the European Union. There are also some code words, we call it euphemism. That means that negative results and events are described positively. The language is minimizing, like rationalization, flexibility, employability. What does it mean? Employability in Austria means that you should do every job everywhere for every wage. Then you are flexible and deployable. Or reduction of obstacles of investment. Downsizing firms means cutting jobs. Or the term reform, in former days it means more social justice, better provision and education. Now it becomes a synonym for the destruction of the welfare state. Reduction in costs means often shifting of costs to the taxpayer or finally to the environment. Now, second part, what are the consequences for social work of this neoliberal thinking? It means a demolition of the welfare state. Of course, there are new social focal points, many drug addicts, we have many migrants and asylum seekers in Europe, from Northern Africa, from the eastern part of Europe. That means more task for social work, but with reduced or frozen resources. And we fear there's a replacement of professionals. Also, we have a 100 years old history of social work. Yes, now politicians are more and more crying for citizens' involvement in volunteer work. Of course, it's good when we have voluntarians, but voluntarians and citizens' involvement should not replace professionals to save costs. Also, a movement like the economization of social work. Also, social work is subjected to the logic of the market and profit. Methods and concepts of business administration and private entrepreneurship are implemented in social organizations with the promise of more effectiveness, efficiency, and better quality in social work. There I want to quote a famous economist such as Peter Drucker, who defined what really effectiveness and efficiency means. We often speak about effectiveness and efficiency also in social work. He says effectiveness means to do the right things, and efficiency to do the things right. And to be efficient and effective means doing the right things right. Being aware of this, we should question that social work could learn from business and economy. If on the one hand you look at the World Hunger Report, 25,000 human beings, 80,000 children are starving every day. On the other hand, we destroy goods. Yes, there's an overproduction of goods. Then you can ask yourself if world economy is effective and efficient. Also, of course, in the free market, competitiveness is important. But also now, in social work, there starts competition instead of solidarity. In Austria, we speak about creaming effects in fringe groups. What means creaming? Cream are the good clients, yeah? Clients who are easily to handle with, and it makes the creaming effects like the cream to displacement of the weakest clients in favor of clients who are more easily looked after with positive results. Only those clients are advised who did not cause their predicament through gross intelligence and who can be settled with little cost to the financial backup. Also, quality standards are dropped to get the biggest piece of the budget cake, yes? And the marketing of the social product seems to replace the lobbying for the client. Our clients often have no voice to speak. Homeless people, asylum seekers, drug addicts, and social workers should give them a voice. Also, economic efficiency seems to replace professionality. Success in saving costs seems to be more important than success in support for social work. Advice and care services transformed to products. And public goods, which were guaranteed by law in a welfare state to provide every citizen with a life worth living, become products which must be bought. Citizens with inalienable rights develop into economic citizens who have only rights for that which they can afford or buy. And clients became customers. Also, there are changes in the role of social work. There seems that more and more poverty is conserved instead of real integration, like an old phrase from the 60s, 80s of the former century says, social workers seem to be nurses of capitalism, that they don't heal from the roots, but only care for symptoms, that social workers became auxiliary sheriffs instead of advocates for clientele, and also that social services are more and more standardized. Yes, that one counseling interview must only last 10 minutes and not more. And that, I think, this standardization is the death of social work. What is the reaction of social work, especially with a view on Austria and Middle Europe? There's an ambivalent reaction. One German professor says the neoliberal transformation of our welfare state can neither be condemned, definitely, in the perspective of social work, nor be acclaimed. Another reaction is uncritical adoption. And the third is the political engagement, yes, resistance, which regards social work as a human rights profession and calls itself radical or critical social work. That means, as a perspective for social work, whether someone gets the necessary means for a life worth living can be decided by the market. Social work is not aware, but the result of common efforts of all participants, the social workers, the managers and the clients, and the simultaneous management of circumstances which makes the success more likely. You can be a very, very good social worker. You can be very good in motivating people, but you can't give people a job or a house when there are no jobs and houses. Yes, that's the responsibility of the state. Resistance is possible. Social work is not simply at the mercy of the hierarchy of power. Resistance to policy, which requires adaptation to the force of circumstance, is possible. That means that social work, by analyzing social problems, should also turn its main attention to socially determined structural causes, should make them public, interfere in current socio-political debates, and so create a counter-public opinion. The resistance should be based on a well-founded scientific analysis of the problems, the clients of social work, and their structural reasons, and the code of ethics, which question this neoliberal thinking on the background of the human rights and the principles of social justice. Like the International Federation of Social Work says in the Ethics Code, in number 4.2, social workers have a duty, not the hobby, a duty to bring to the attention of their employers, policymakers, politicians and the general public situations where resources are inadequate or where distribution of resources, policies and practices are oppressive, unfair or harmful. So I make another phrase. When our politicians say welfare state, the social state can't be afforded any longer, I want to say the welfare state for the rich and the banks can't be afforded any longer. Instead of a decrease, there should be an increase of the welfare state. And there would be good elements of a new welfare state like just distribution, new tax system, the reduce of tax privileges for the rich, value-added taxes, property taxes, harmonization of taxes, and measures against tax evasions. And if you think you are so alone, you can't resist, I want to quote a phrase of a philosopher. If you think you are too small to change something, then try to sleep if there is one mosquito in your room. So I want to come to an end, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. So any questions?
So you can ask me about this topic and also about everything concerning social work in Austria, social work education.
It is not that common. We have a speaker from Europe, so we have more from US, maybe more some from UK, but from the continental Europe.
Yes, but Europe is quite different to US. Yes.
I'm very happy today. I can't be more happy for the awakening of the idea of social work. The same is happening in Hong Kong. The idea that you've mentioned, all those catchphrases, all the guiding philosophy of social workers, for social workers, makes things happen. Exactly the same thing is happening in Europe. I am personally a special educationist. I work for people with different kind of disabilities. And I'm a Hong Kong citizen, of course. I want to know how is the idea that you just raised is widespreading or not?
It starts to spread. I think it starts to spread, but there are small groups in every country who are networking. Yes.
It starts to work.
It
right?
starts to work. Yes.
Okay. Is it flourishing in some way?
It starts to flourish. It's dominated by the other doctrine. Yes,
Yeah, I can
and
see that.
like I said in the last phrase, often also social workers think the economy is so powerful. Yes, of course we have demonstrated. We have demonstrated last century. Yes, and do we have really a chance? And it needs a really a hard standing. Yes, you need to be patient. Yes, and you need to believe. That change is possible. And there are of course many social workers who just do their work. Okay, you can't do anything. I do my work. I have a good job.
Small potatoes.
Yes, small potatoes. Yes, but also there are. I feel it with my students. Yes, and they are very idealistic. Yes, and they are enthusiastic hearing these things, and they want to change something. Yes, and I think perhaps there starts a new. Because we are a small faculty, also social work, we have no, if you think what economy has means for lobbying, but our lobbying needs money. We have not so much money, and we have to do it, some lobbying and demonstration in our free time, yes, because we are not paid for lobbying. Also for the clients, perhaps one special field in Europe is the asylum policy. Asylum seekers from the Morocco and so on, from Afghanistan, they have no voice, and they also not very popular in the common public. Yes, they often see, they should stay in their own country, and you have to swim against the stream. Yes, as a social worker, and therefore said you need good education and also solidarity. All different services should work together. Yes.
Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I hear from the so-called neoliberalism, or some of us tell the Washington consensus.
Washington consensus, yes.
In Hong Kong or in other countries, I think, most of the social workers work under organizations. And the effect bringing distrust between organizations, serving organizations, as well as distrust between the management and the frontline social workers, right? And sometimes even bringing distrust within the same field, within the government, between government and NGOs. And there's a lot of distrust. This distrust mainly comes from a few main reasons, as you mentioned. Capping of resources, using of competitive contracts,
Yes.
and that things also bring a lot of distrust. And how, with your Austrian experience in overcoming this distrust, so that you can get a solidarity, a solid, consolidated field, social work field, in coping with this megatrend. And another question is, what would be the organization variables that are important to allow an NGO to be more or less susceptible to the influences of the Washington consensus?
Concerning the first question, I think it's very important who is the manager of a social organization, yes, and how is he educated, yes. And we also have started at our university with programs for social management. And that's very important that also the future managers know what social work is. That not only students of economy become the managers also of social organizations, but there's a special program to be a manager of a social organization, and here the best would be that social workers develop from the basic social work and become managers. I think then they knew better what the work is, what it means to work with clients, and that you can't see clients like customers, yes, who buy something, yes. It's always a co-production, yes. I think it depends on the education of the managers and the dialogue, of course, yeah. How they are looking for dialogue, how social workers have chance to report their experience to the manager. It also depends how big organizations are. But we have good experience with these programs. We have a master program, social management, yes, and we also know this distrust, yes, we also know, but we also make the experiences that with these educated managers it works better. Also they can do miracles, of course, but also we also need courses for, it's not only a hobby to do professional lobbying, also for social work, to speak with politicians. And that goes to the second question. I think a good chance is to do, because the social work education in Austria has a long tradition, 100 years, but we are only at the university for 10 years. And that's now a good chance, not only to criticize, yes, and warn and read, but to make evidence-based research, yes, and show these empiric results, yes, to the public and to the politicians, yes. We should have well-founded results. What are the reasons for homelessness? What are the reasons for drug addiction? And you also can calculate in an economic way that if you give money to social work, especially for prevention, it's much more cheaper in the long term for the politics. But politicians often think very narrow for the small period, yes, of government, and not thinking of the long future. If you make prevention, health prevention, prevention for drugs, it's much more cheaper long term than you have so many recovery programs. Or if you have also prevention for eviction and so on. Is this maybe this an answer? Or?
Well, can I make follow-up question.
Yes.
The organization variables must something related to the governance of the NGO. Right? What would be your advice to Hong Kong NGO governance? Coping with this
Yes.
neoliberalism.
You see, what do you mean with the organization and the non? There are two different forms of organizations. There are the NGOs.
The NGOs.
There are the NGOs, and the advice for the managers of the NGOs.
Yeah, for the governance of
The governors of the NGOs. The
Yeah,
governors
so
are the
let's say
managers.
managers is if it is a well-trained social workers from below, then you are quite confident that he or she will, based on social work values,
Yes, of course.
counter all neoliberalistic negative impact to our service system. Okay, I believe it. But what about the governance?
The governors.
The governance
The
means the
governors.
NGO
The
board.
board of directors.
The NGO board.
Yeah.
The NGO board is the one who make the choice, who make the decisions.
What do you really mean with the governors of the
governance.
NGOs?
The board.
That means the board.
At the board.
The board.
Are they so big in Hong Kong? Because we
Well,
have
it's,
very small.
It's not big, but the top management have to report to the board. Right?
Yes,
If
I
the
see.
board did not have the same sense, the same training background, of
Yes.
course not the training background. Most of them are social work.
That's the problem. Yes, of course. Yes.
And then
And in the board, there are the people in the board. Are they voluntary or are they paid?
voluntary.
They are voluntary. Yes, and they make the big decisions. And they speak with the politicians for funding.
Some of them.
But I think
Yeah, it depends. I think the board should consist of different professions, and the board could be a possibility for good lobbying, but we have to influence the board, yes, and to have good contact, to report from the basis what really happens. It depends when I regard to Austria who is in the board, and we have very good board members, yes, who understand, yes, and the problem is more the board is okay, but it depends on the connections to the parties, yes, and if there's a well-known board member, he has good connections, yes, but it's very important who is the board member, yes, and to give monthly reports to the board member about our doings, also to work together with the universities, yes, to make evaluation of social services, that they have good numbers, evidence-based social work, that social work makes a difference and has effects, yes. It's not so easy like numbers of a company, yes, you put in and output, and it's not so easy to see the effects, the long-term effects of drug treatment, yes, for drug-addicted people. But it needs research for more years, and it's not so easy because you have to anonymize, yes, the data and so on. But I think in Austria we have good experiences with our board, yes, and that's not so a big distance between the board and the basis. We have very small organizations. About one organization has perhaps 30 employees, and one of the biggest has perhaps 200. Yes. Yes.
Thank you for your service. I want to share my views on this question.
We have also a different tradition because we have a long welfare state.
I think the management, the social workers, have to build a united alliance, a united front.
Yes.
Involving the frontline worker as well as the board members, so that the whole organization will have a definite and clear position on whether we choose quantity or quality, whether we choose expansion or quality,
I completely agree.
whether we should serve people or just serve for resources. Right? we must build that kind of alliances and
Yes.
consent.
Yes, that's it. And counter Washington consensus. Yes, and that I
But
forgot.
this is not. It's very, very difficult because
Yes.
the fellow workers may not support you because you are talking now. Our society doesn't have. Our organization do not have expansion, and we will not have promotion.
Yes,
So,
I know.
It's quite
Yes.
a difficult issue.
Yes, we have some networks. We have some networks, as we have trade unions, and the long addition with trade unions, we have also networks for board members, for different, yes. They meet each other 2 times a year. We have some, especially with the same client deal. Perhaps we have an organization where we buy for all organizations for homeless people, they meet each other 2 times a year. It's an informal networking to make that they don't drop quality standards. To have because Samsung, who gets the biggest cake of the budgets, who does it with lower standards, yes? Only 2 members of 2 persons, others says we need 4 persons to do good social work. But it's very, say the very important thing, alliances, yes? Alliances, we need to form alliances, yes? But we have a tradition in this. Yes, we have a tradition. We have I don't know if you have like the IFSVW, a national organization for, you have in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
There was a big conference, I think 4 years ago. The World Conference was in Hong Kong, yes? You have a question? Is it okay? Yes.
Sorry. Actually, I have 2 questions. Please allow me to raise the first one. Because you are from Australia, right? And you talk about neoliberalism. Maybe I'm wondering whether you know Gibson Graham, the 2 academicians who give rise to the idea of community economy, something quite alternative. Yeah. So I'm wondering whether you have done some related work to respond to the neoliberalism or something critical social work. Can you share your experience?
There are built some organizations who call them critical social work, and what they are doing, they are publishing. They have a journal, and they are making conferences on this topic. They spread their thoughts. Sometimes there are also demonstrations. They go to the street, yes, or they make also small films and present it at the beginning of the cinemas. Perhaps they produce alternative films, perhaps especially to be aware of a very vulnerable group, the asylum seekers, for example, because on the one hand, you know, the EU, they built a new fence around Europe. Yes, within Europe we have harmony and free economy, but considering the border to Northern Africa, they don't allow the refugees to cross the sea, and so many people drunk in the Middle Sea. There was one example that one person who goes by ship to the Middle Sea, and he saw a small boat with overcrowded boat, and he saved these people, and he came to the border, and he was called a smuggler. And that's crazy, yes? And so there are organizations who make films, books, also journals and conferences, also lectures, yes? There are 3 or 4 persons who go from district to district and give speeches, yes? But the problem is, when you give speeches and lectures, who comes?
Yeah.
People come who are already interested, yes? You need to have you have to get place in other journals, because the journals we write, that always they are already open for this, yes? Perhaps it's one possibility to go to the cinema, and before the normal film you make an advertisement, then the whole public can see this, but it also costs money, yes, to get an advertisement in the cinema at the beginning of the film. But there are very creative things, yes? It's not a big movement, yes, but it starts, yes.
What I mean is, those things you talk about is more like public education or advocacy. Do you think whether social workers can be involved in something practical? For example, I know even in China, a country whose social work is in a very initial stage of its development.
In a very
initial stage.
at the beginning, initials, yes,
initial
yes,
stage.
yes,
At the very beginning, I mean, as a
yes.
profession.
A very young profession.
Very young profession. Some social workers in China noticed that social work may lack a sense of structural causes or structural problems. So
Yes.
some of them give up the clinical social work or psychological treatment of their clients, and they went to rural China and help their villagers to develop local economies by using a very alternative way, such as fair trade or,
Yes.
or something
Yes.
kind of. But actually, my dissertation is about this. But I found there are many tensions within those cases. It's quite difficult for social workers to do that,
Yes.
to be involved in economic development. So I want to know. Actually, I know Australia also has some similar practices. So I want to know your opinions on such social work, social work paradigm. Yeah, I don't know.
I
because
think
it's so
both is
difficult.
necessary. We need the normal clinical social work. We need the case work, the face-to-face work. But I know also these projects, these alternative economy projects, yes,
alternative
collective
economy.
and so on. And in Austria, for example, not social workers are doing
Not
this,
social
but
workers,
other
NGOs.
NGOs. We have special NGOs who do this, yes. Also, we call it, or special organizations who want to make circles where they are exchanging goods without money, yes. I give you lessons and you are repairing my car and so on. And they are beginning, also fair trade is now very popular. When fair trade goods are starting, you were a real outsider, and now in the normal shops in Austria we get fair trade, or also clean clothes, yes, where you really can see that and Austrian population becomes more aware of this. We only buy buy products with conscience. Yes, is this dress constructed in a sweatshop? Yes, or normally, or is child labor behind it or not? Yes, there becomes more and more consciousness in Austria about not only buy that what is cheap, and of course like toys and so made in China, yes, but only often in China there are not so good conditions for workers sometimes, yes. And we know that the companions, that the companies, yes, become also more aware, that the people become more aware of this, yes, and say, oh, we have to look, yes, we have to give also some ethic codes and so on, also for the companies, yes.
So, can I ask more?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes, we have 20 minutes left, yes.
Because in China, I think when they did this, they felt very difficult because sometimes the price of fair trade products are more expensive
Yes,
than
that's
common
the
goods.
problem.
But in China, I think there are fewer people willing to accept this kind of goods. But in Australia, I think the situation might be better. I'm wondering whether those NGOs involved in such kind of career feel it's very difficult to let more people accept their products or to educate the public. I don't know what's the situation in Australia, but I think in China it's quite difficult.
But also in Austria, my students say we are aware of this, but they also say, okay, Professor Stark, you earn much money. Yes, you have a good wages, you can afford fair trade and clean clothes, but as a student, you have not so much money. And of course, fair trade products and good products are more expensive. Yes, they are more expensive. Yes. also good nourishment, yes, biological food, yes, non-genetic food, it's all everything more expensive. But in spite of this fact, people more buy these things.
There's still a group of people.
What?
There are still a group of people willing to buy this product.
Yes, of course, yeah, and it becomes a market. Yeah, you can make money also with this. Yes, yes.
So you also think it's proper for social workers to be involved in such kind of.
Of course, yes, yes.
But for me, I have some ideas different. Yeah.
Any other question?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor, for your presentation. My first question is that, according to my understanding, you're kind of support for the increase rather than the decrease of social welfare in Europe.
Yes.
But according to my knowledge, that these days that Europe is kind of raising to the bottom, so that they can kind of get more competitive in the globalization process. And one concern for this is that the governments are afraid of those. I know in Europe it's kind of free mobility, so they are afraid of to attract so many immigrants from other countries.
Yes.
So I'm wondering how would you concern this problem? And another question is that, like in Nordic countries, Nordic countries,
yes.
they kind of have a higher social welfare
Yes.
compared to other countries in Europe. But one concern maybe for those governments is that the welfare trap is kind of they attract those workers that to be inactive in the labor market. So maybe for in this sense, the increase of social welfare is not that good.
I know this argument. Yes.
So
In my opinion, of course, there are different standards within Europe. Yes.
yes.
And the so-called European Union becomes bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Yes. But we also saw this development very critical, because on the one hand, now perhaps the Eastern European countries, Romania, Bulgaria, are member of the EU. Yes.
Yes.
But it's good for the companies, but not so good for the people. When I was in a conference in Romania, yes, and I spoke with my colleague, professor, and we spoke also about our salary, and I earned 10 as much. And also, and when I saw the prices in the restaurants, they are the same as in Austria.
Yeah.
And that's between all professions. The prices are rising, but the wages are still small.
Okay.
And that's the problem. And of course, with the open borders, of course, the Nordic countries and also Austria attracts migrants. Yes. And also we have also another movement is who say we don't like these people. They should stay where they are.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's and then they are rising the right-wing parties. You know, they renationalizing. Yes. That's our own country, we won't have foreigners, only the good foreigners, of course.
Yeah.
People from Hong Kong and from,
Nice
and
areas.
yes, and tourists and oligarchs from Russia, of course, they are welcome. And I say, money always gets asylum. Yes, money gets always asylum, but not the poor people. Yes, and I think, in my opinion, we should have the same within the EU. Now we have a free market. But we should also have the same standards in social. Not a race to the bottom, but a race to the top also in social, the quality of social standards. Yes, because that's the problem. Yes, the EU, the European Union, is only an economic community, and it's good for the big companies, but not the social community. And there are so big differences. Yes, and of course now we have the fear that it's a race to the bottom. As you have said, it's to be competitive.
Yeah.
Yes, you should race to the bottom. But people forget, yes, it's also an advantage of competitiveness if you have peace. And you know, poverty is always a reason also of crime. When you look at the US, on the one hand it's so rich, but it's on the other hand, yeah, they have millions in prison. And not because the American people are so bad, but of course poverty causes crime. And they are in prison due to small crimes. Like if you are hungry, if I am hungry, I have no job, perhaps I also become a thief. And am stealing the food for my children before I'm starving, yes? Or I become criminal. Also we have asylum seekers, of course, they have no income. And of course there's the temptation, they start drug dealing and so on. And also a very, very bad problem is woman trafficking, especially women from the eastern part. Bulgaria, Monica is a big, and they always are seduced with, yeah, become a dancer, become an actor, and they are dreaming, and then they can do a brothel, yes, and that's a very big problem. Okay?
Thank you.
Well, why don't we do this way? So why don't we officially
Yes?
end the presentation, and then, but feel free to stay behind if you want to have more informal conversation
Yes.
with Professor
Okay, I
Tan.
have time.
So why don't we give a big hand for Professor Tan? Please stay behind if you really have some conversation.
Yes, if you have questions,
Yeah.
yes, we can, perhaps, if you are interested, next year in June 25, we make an international summer school. Yes, perhaps I met a colleague, Professor Zhang, in Finland, yes, where we meet, and perhaps you are welcome to join the summer school, also to explore Austria. It's always a combination between theory and research and also tourism, yes?
Theory research on
What?
Tourism.
What?
Tourists to Austria.
Theories? What?
I mean, you talk about the summer school program.
Yes,
you
we have-
will talk about
It's a
theories
mixture,
and
theories and
and
also
research.
a tourist. Also, if you come to
It's
Austria, you
all
should.
country.
It's, yes,
It's all
or
country.
it's a combination. Yes, on the one hand we have theory input from different countries, lectures. Then we make field visits and also a cultural problem. If you are in Linz, you should also be in Vienna. Because you don't come so often to Europe, and when you are there, there should also be space. Not only, I know Hong Kong students are very eager, yes, compared to, it was very interesting for me when I was in Finland, yes, there were different students from Hong Kong, from US, and the Hong Kong students were studying in the evening, and US students were making party. Yes, it was quite different. Austrians are in the middle, yes. Yes, but perhaps you are invited, and I will be in contact with you, and
Please.
perhaps in autumn or in next semester we have the complete program, and I will send you. And it would be nice if you or also a professor will come and give a lecture, and some students. There are also students of the US, also of Germany, and so about 5-6 nations. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.